Hi students, this is Mrs. T and this is your cultural geography class for week 9 of our 15-week semester. So this week we are going to transition from chapter 6, which is all about language, into chapter 7, which is all about religion. Now, we're not really going to leave language behind because it's a central component of the religious concept too, or the concept of religion also. And language, like religion, is one of the central components. They're really equally significant in developing cultural identity for groups. They're key components in the ethnic description or the ethnic identity for cultural groups around the world and from one neighborhood to the next in the United States. So language is a marker of cultural identity, social identity, self-concept. Religion is also a key component in all three of those things also. It's a key marker to identify your ethnic identity, social identity, cultural group. Religion and language both are key components in those concepts. So we're not going to leave language behind. Chapter 6 flows straight on in really well into chapter 7, which is about religion. So let's look at religion from a social science perspective. This is not a controversial topic to a social scientist, especially when we're looking at it from the very basic level that we're going to go into it today. We just need to know what the definition of religion is from a social science perspective. I'm going to change up some of the words from your textbook author's definition in chapter 7, just because I think that it's a little bit confusing maybe, or it is a correct definition in your textbook, but it's just a little bit maybe iffy on whether it'll be easily understood by everybody in class. And so I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit so that it's more universally understandable. But the word universal is going to be in that definition. So get your notebook out, get your textbook out. You can kind of follow along with topics from the textbook, but also take notes on this. I'll try to go slowly and punctuate this and repeat things that I want you to make sure and have in your notes, since I don't have the whiteboard behind me today to turn around and write stuff on. So make sure that you pause the video and get all that stuff out so that you can follow along as you should, because we're going to have a quiz on this. This is going to go toward Project 3 that we will get sometime after the break. And also the final test or the final project will have components of religion on it too. So pause the video, please, and go get those notes. Okay. So let's talk about what the definition of religion is from a social science perspective. And by now, hopefully you found the definition that your author uses in the textbook. And so you can compare it to what I'm going to tell you now, which is a little bit of a longer definition, hopefully more explanatory. Okay, so religion in general, not one particular belief system, but religion in general, is a set of beliefs. It's a set of rituals, it's a set of practices that unify, it creates unity for people who follow those beliefs, who follow those rituals and follow those practices. Religion is a system of beliefs that creates unity. And another key thing that it does is it creates meaning in life. That's a key thing that human beings need. Human beings are animals. We're the top of the food chain in the animal kingdom. But human beings often think about, and here's where language and communication and cognitive ability that we discussed in chapter 6 comes into the religion chapter, one of the places it comes in. The human animal often ponders meaning to life. The human animal often asks questions about, where was I before I had this body? Before or after this body will be gone, is there some place where that self-concept, where I will go? And so religion is a set of beliefs and practices that answer those key questions that human beings have. It unites people around the answers that they find acceptable to those questions, meaning in life kind of questions. I think your textbook says something about religion is a set of practices that gives ultimate priorities or ultimate answers to questions. The word ultimate here means final. It means final answers. And so that's a key concept to the definition of religion from a social science perspective. Religion is a set of beliefs and practices that unites people around those beliefs and practices, and it answers key questions, vital questions for the human condition that human beings have. And those questions are usually about ultimate outcomes, final outcomes. Sometimes they're about historic things like, where did I come from? Did I exist before this moment of consciousness between you and me? And will I exist after this body ceases to breathe and be part of this realm? Will I continue to exist? Those kinds of questions cannot be answered by empirical science. We are a social science, so we can look to the cognitive realm of human ability, whereas a natural science looks to empirical evidence. Meaning, your biology class, your chemistry class, your physics class, you set up labs where you test things, you measure outcomes, you say, I wonder if this is true, and you can set up an experiment to test whether it is true. And then you come up with evidence that everybody can see, everybody can try to duplicate, everybody can try to test its validity, test its reliability, and they come up with empirical answers that exist in the realm of natural science. Social science, where we do use the same scientific method as the natural sciences do, social science has a little bit more of a philosophical bent to it. So there's a branch of philosophy called metaphysics, and these are kinds of the proofs where we can reason, we can use reason and logic in order to come to conclusions about things, acceptable conclusions. But those conclusions aren't necessarily things that we can take into a laboratory and test and get empirical evidence about. Religion, on the other hand, gives us answers. Sometimes people will say, that's not a believable answer, and other times people will say, that's a believable answer, I'm all in. And that's where you end up with, you might notice my hand signals where I've got people over here with an unbelievable answer in the point of view of these people over here with a believable answer to themselves, but you're the other because you have a different point of view. So religion it's a strong and powerful component of the human condition. It's a strong and powerful component of ethnic behavior because it involves rules about life. It gives us kind of a purpose for living because of those questions that we ask, those metaphysical kind of questions that we ask. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? Is there something larger than I? And religions are the ultimate places. Here's that word ultimate again, and the reason your textbook author uses the word ultimate, that religion is the place where people look for ultimate answers to vital questions about the permanence or the temporal nature of humanity. Some religions will say that the human condition is temporary, the human condition is finite for one lifetime, and then you either cease to exist or you get recycled, so to speak, into the chain of life, and you come back, your spirit or your consciousness comes back into a different body or maybe even a different form. And so for the question of, is there life after this particular lifetime I'm living now, some religions have in their belief system, in their practice, in their customs, the idea that life is recyclable, so to speak, if that's a word. I hope the captions spell it correctly, if that's not a word. So some religions have that in their belief pattern, and that's the way that they answer the ultimate question about purpose in life or final outcomes of a life. Other religions have different answers about that final outcome. And so, what are the ultimate priorities in life? I think that's the phrase that your textbook author uses. It's meaning in life. It's a foundation for the norms that we live in our society. What makes us get up in the morning and follow the norms of daily life and do the daily grind and go to sleep and do it all over again? The idea that there is an ultimate outcome that we're supposed to be living for. So some religions say that that ultimate outcome is a place of enlightenment, or it is a place of perfect happiness, or it is a place with a name like heaven, or it's a place with a name like hell, for instance. And so these words, heaven and hell, for Christianity and for Judaism, these words are the answers to ultimate outcomes for the human condition. And so people who have these different beliefs, whether you come from a faith system that believes in that reincarnation cycle, or you come from a faith system that believes in that ultimate outcome of a location where your immortal soul will go separated from your body in the end, these are answers to that ultimate question of meaning of life and purpose and final outcomes of you and your lifetime. And these are questions that human beings have that natural science cannot answer for us. And that's why religion is such a powerful force in ethnic makeup of people. When we look at the vast differences in the belief systems worldwide, which we'll do a little bit of that today, when we look at those vast differences, we can probably see how religion can be a central component in identifying against others. Because religion is one of those things that we are very ethnocentric about. So there's a blast from the past, the word ethnocentrism. I think I've used it several times in class since the first time I wrote it on that board. But ethnocentrism is about bias in favor of your own ethnic group and bias against another ethnic group, because you use your own culture, your own way of life, your own mindset as a rule, as a standard. And if someone else doesn't follow that same standard, doesn't have that same culture, we tend to judge them based on ourselves. So even the other day in class, my face-to-face class, we were talking about the origins of the coronavirus, and we had some ethnocentric moments because it's from the story is, or at least my students told me, and y'all can Google this to make sure it's true. My students told me that from one of the wet markets in China, there were some animals that typically in the United States, Estado-Unidense people do not eat things like bats, they don't eat things like snakes, they don't eat things like the kinds of animals that were being sold in this wet market in China. And from that trade, from that consumption of those animals that are odd to United Statesian people, this virus spread into the population of China, and now you see those disease vectors spreading out across the world. So there were some ethnocentric moments there in our class the other day when we were talking about those animals that to us are odd to eat. We maybe would refuse to eat them out of ethnocentric kind of feelings. But ethnocentrism is a powerful thing that we need to look at carefully when we're talking about religion. Because I focused a lot in class about the negative side of ethnocentrism. For instance, in the language chapter, when we were talking about language and power, or language being used as a weapon, we can talk about how linguistic imperialism, which essentially refers to conquest of nations and colonialism, whereas England colonized other areas of the world, or Spain colonized other areas of the world and brought with them the language that their native places had. So now the language of Central and South America is predominantly Spanish. Well, it wasn't that way 600 years ago. So that colonial or that conquest of Spain, and Portugal also, you'll find Portuguese spoken in a lot of South America, and English and French in Canada and in the United States. These languages are not native to this area. So through the principles of linguistic imperialism, they were brought here by those cultures that took over the land from other places. And so that ethnocentrism of forcing one language out and using your language as the standard can be, there's one example of how ethnocentrism can work against human equality, can work against human rights. If you want to say, which many people do, that your ethnic identity is your human right to have and to embrace. Well, with religion, it gets a little tricky, ethnocentrism does, because ethnocentrism has that bad side that I've focused on so much, but it also has a good side, because concepts and feelings like loyalty, concepts and feelings like patriotism, or like faith, which is a religious word. Faith refers to this belief in answers to questions that empirical science cannot give us answers for. And in order to have a strong faith, you need ethnocentrism to feel bound to that particular belief system. Ethnocentrism, the positive side of ethnocentrism, is that we have loyalty to our group. In the proper definition of religion from a social science perspective, religion is that set of beliefs, it's that set of practices that unifies people. That unity is caused by ethnocentrism. We are united around a belief, we're united around a faith, which is the belief in answers to questions that empirical sciences cannot answer for us. And so, religion is something that definitely can be used as a weapon, and we can find many examples in history where religion was also a conquering kind of tool used by colonizers to affect cultural change in the group of people that they're taking over, in the region of the world that they're taking over. So religion is definitely something like language that can be used as a weapon against your ethnicity in favor of the dominant group's ethnicity. But religion is also something that if you yourself consider yourself to have strong faith, strong loyalty, strong allegiance, any of those words that kind of mean that you're attached for the long haul to something, whether it is patriotism or allegiance to a nation, or faith, loyalty, and allegiance to a religion, those feelings are caused by ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism can cause, and does cause, people who are avid religious belief followers to feel that their religion is correct. Not all of you certainly follow or practice a religion. U.S. Census data in the last 10 years, and we'll have to see what the results are for this set of this decade, but in the last 10 years, actually over several of the last census data collections, we in the United States have seen a rise in what folks call spirituality and a decrease in what people call religious behaviors, which is going to church on a regular schedule or following particular practices and customs that are typical of one belief system or another. And spirituality is more of this connection to the metaphysical world of philosophizing and wondering about the future, or wondering about these questions that empirical science can't answer for us. So ethnocentrism is something that is extremely strong in the religious world. It's extremely strong in human beings in general. But regarding religious beliefs, it's one of those really divisive factors in creating the other as opposed to your belief system and the other's belief system. Religion is huge. Religion is a major component of our cultural identity. It's a major component of all of the aspects of our identity because it's a guideline for the way people should behave. So we have in the United States, for instance, Christianity is the dominant religion in the United States. That doesn't mean that everybody in the United States has to be Christian, but what that means is, since it's the dominant religion in the United States, the legal system, the norms, the behaviors in general that are expected of everybody within the nation, whether you are a Christian or not, that those norms, those laws affect everyone. So state offices are closed on Sundays, and many of the state-sanctioned holidays that things are closed on correspond to Christian holidays, such as Christmas Eve or Christmas. We have the state holiday or the national holiday Thanksgiving, which, if you read the traditional stories, it's a day to stop and thank your creator, thank the Christian God for the blessings that you have in your life. In these last few decades, where spirituality is overwhelmingly the way people report their religious behavior, rather than a direct affiliation with Baptist or Methodist or Catholic or any of these other, any of these different denominations of Christianity. In those last few decades with spirituality, the meaning of Thanksgiving has changed a little bit to thank the people around you for all the work that they've done and for accepting you the way you are and for providing you for your life, all these different kinds of things. But ultimately, that holiday started with the idea of a national day for everybody to stop and thank the Christian God for the blessings and benefits that we enjoy in our life here in the United States. So religion is a huge part of secular life also. Secular is a vocabulary word from chapter 7. Secular refers to anything outside the realm of religious belief. Anything that exists within empirical science would be secular information, but it's also just common everyday life and the norms that govern common everyday life that cannot be linked back to religious moral beliefs. So, religions affect a great deal of behavior, but not all behavior that exists within a national group or an ethnic group. So, a lot of the rituals that are part of religious practice include worship in a certain kind of way. Some religions have pilgrimages that are involved, like the Hajj to Mecca. In your lifetime, a lot of religions have the idea that you should be charitable and give alms to less fortunate people. Religions also give a foundation for interacting with I want to say Almighty here, although that is a biased word because I haven't told you the different types of religious categories yet, and not all religious categories have the concept of an almighty being who controls things. But prayer is a component of almost every religion that you can cite. Even neo-paganism religions, like Wicca, for instance, has a form of prayer where you interact with the environment. You interact with Mother Earth, for instance, in the cycles of the seasons. And there are different holidays where rituals are key components of those holidays that serve as a way to interact with the powers that are above you, or the powers that flow through you as it is. So prayer, rituals, worship, all of these things are cultural manifestations of religion. Many religions have sacrifice involved. A friend of mine in modern times, I'm not talking about 400 years ago, but a friend of mine in modern times who's from Lebanon, she and her 5 siblings got word that her father had cancer and was looking at, his death, his very soon to happen death. This was a few years ago. And there's 6 of them in that family, and they follow Islam, and they immediately, all 6 of the siblings each bought the best lamb that they could find and had an imam, which is a religious practitioner of Islam, go to a central location outside their father's house in Lebanon and sacrifice each of the lambs according to ancient rituals that come from Islam in order for Allah to intercede so that the best outcome could happen for their father. And of course, they had elements of empirical knowledge about the situation. Their father had cancer. Here was the treatment. Here's what the treatment could possibly do. There's the empirical knowledge. But they brought religious components into it because there's that element of uncertainty. Cancer is curable occasionally. And so we want to know, can we influence the power that is above us to have an effect on that outcome for this worldly realm that we live in now? And if we think about other religions and how we interact with the powers that exist, whether they are above us or whether they flow through us and we're a part of an equal realm of powers that exist in all things, each religion has a way of interacting with that supernatural or that otherworldly kind of realm that often is cited as the answers to unanswerable questions in our life. Like, what's the outcome of this surgery going to be? Or what's the final, what's our final goal here with this health treatment? Or how will this cancer turn out and change our family? We're going to ask something to intercede to try to bring about the best or most beneficial outcome. So religions are very, very important for everyday life. There's natural disasters that people turn to religion to cope with. There's, in therapy, many therapists use spirituality and religious beliefs to help people cope with certain issues that they're dealing with in life. Religion is a key factor in motivation for a lot of behaviors in our society. Okay, so let's look at three. Let's look at 3 particular types of religious categories that exist around the world. So there are 3 religious categories that we want to talk about. One of them is monotheism or monotheistic religions. Another is polytheism or polytheistic religion. And then another one is animistic religion. Okay, so let's start with monotheism. I assume that's probably going to be the easiest one to understand because most of my students have some sort of affiliation or specialized knowledge in monotheistic religions because the 3 most common religions, or 3 of the 5 most common religions in the world are monotheistic religions. Mono is a prefix that means one, and theism or theistic is a word that means God. So theism means, or monotheism means belief in one God. Monotheistic religions and this one God concept usually look at that one deity, that one God, as all-powerful, all-knowing, all present everywhere. And this particular God is in control of everything, every component of life on Earth, every component of life if it exists on other planets, and the whole universe is in the hands of this almighty God. The three common monotheistic religions that we know about are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And those are three of the five most common religions or dominant religions in the world. So monotheistic religions typically have a hierarchy among the belief system. So there is a God, there are saints or angels that are kind of intermediaries between the human realm and the God realm. Okay, so there's a hierarchy typically in monotheistic religions that is often used to try to help explain, try to help give answers for why some kinds of social injustice occurs in the world, like the vast differences between wealth and poverty. We can look at correlations to the hierarchy in that religious concept of the gods or the God, the saints, the angels, and humans, and we can see that spirituality has this hierarchy in it, and therefore that translates into the hierarchy among human beings. And typically, the answer to the ultimate end for humanity in monotheistic religions is that we are going to leave this world behind and we are going to go join the ultimate hierarchy in the afterlife. And so monotheistic religions are very common these days, but they really haven't been very common throughout all of human history. When we get to Thursday's discussion, I'll show you a map, a little animated map video of where the five dominant religions of the world started and how they spread. And two of them, one of those religions is a polytheistic religion, and another one of those religions kind of doesn't have a god at all. It's more about like the metaphysical connection of the human mindset, the human consciousness to the cosmos, sort of. For a very quick rundown of what Buddhism is all about that we'll get to on Thursday. But I just used another keyword. It's another category of religion worldwide, polytheism. So you know what theism means. It refers to a god, but in this particular case, with the prefix poly on the beginning, it means multiple gods. Well, how many is multiple? Well, anything between 2 and 2 million, or I don't even need to cap it at 2 million. So it just means multiple gods. In polytheistic religions, since there are multiple gods, typically each god has a particular job or a particular thing that they intercede with humans about. So there might be a god of the sea or of water, there might be a god of the weather, there might be a god of volcanoes, there might be a god of, whatever. Think of different sort of things that we might want intercession about. So in polytheistic religions, there are different gods that are none of whom are considered almighty. The gods share power and divide power among them in polytheistic religions. And so you will find in polytheistic religions different followers of different gods. Let me clarify that. I'm not saying that people can choose, I'm going to follow this one god and this one god only of this pantheon of gods. What I mean here is you would believe in the entire pantheon of gods. However, there might be one particular god or goddess, in this case, who you have a particular devotion to or have a particular affinity with. And so you might have more prayer, more worship, more ritual, more sacrifice. You might have those religious behaviors that every religion has, focused more toward one particular god in the pantheon rather than all of them. And so that's typically what happens. You'll end up with a cult for a particular god, or a vestal of people who follow a particular goddess, for instance, in a polytheistic religion. Polytheistic religions are still around today, but in human history, you see a lot of examples of polytheistic religions. And here's where I want to go back here, and then also animism. Yeah, let me cover animism first, and then I'll talk about how religion answers human questions and how over time we've gotten more and more answers through empirical science. So some religious questions from 4,000 years ago aren't religious questions anymore because we have empirical data to answer those. So they have become questions in science. But before, we had a whole lot of empirical data to answer questions, when many, many more questions were unanswerable through just common human knowledge. Polytheistic religions gave an interface for people to be able to seek answers for particular questions that we didn't have answers for through empirical science yet. Animistic religions are the same way. So let me tell you what animism means. So animism is a religion that can have either one major spirit that controls everything, but typically it's a concept where spirits exist, otherworldly beings exist, and nothing that is considered a god or an ultimate god. There might be a hierarchy of spirits. For instance, the Earth or the planet itself could be the strongest life force or spirit, but a whole bunch of other things within the planet also have spirits and share in a kind of life force that flows through everyone and controls things and keeps us in orbit, so to speak, over the millennia. So animism is the belief in spirits or otherworldly beings that are a part of everything. So not just animals like human beings or horses or whales or anything in between, but the viruses that spread across the planet, or trees, any of the tables or the woodwork in your house that used to be a tree. If you were an animistic practitioner, you would regularly contemplate how the tree had to sacrifice its spirit in order to make that house for you. And so part of your prayer, part of your worship, part of your religious practice would be remembering that spirit that was sacrificed. It would be remembering that your ancestors had spirits that passed on from their earthly life into a spirit realm that is that's surrounding us. You would have access to that spirit, talking to that spirit, for instance, or interacting with that spirit through the behavior that you exhibited in your earthly realm. Are you respectful of things of others? Do you waste things that had spirits and therefore sort of commit a sin, so to speak, against that thing that sacrificed its spirit if you wasted it? So animistic religions have really a deep hold on everyday life of the individuals who practice it, because of that deep interconnection of everything. The shirt that I have on is made out of cotton, and so if I practiced an animistic religion, I would be aware that that cotton plant had a lifetime. It had a spirit when it sacrificed its lifetime, or it sacrificed its fruit in order to make this shirt for me, for instance. So animistic religions are really interesting to study, particularly when you want to prove the point about how strong religious belief is in determining just daily behavior. In our lifetime, in a monotheistic dominated culture like the United States, many of us do practice regular monotheistic rituals and worship services. However, we don't tend to always use those beliefs that we profess in our church life. We don't always live by those beliefs outside of that church life. I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking about you here. But you find that often, that sometimes people have a different church interface than they do in society in general. In animistic religions, it's much harder to do that because in your socialization process, when you are enculturated into your ethnic group, the belief that everything is intertwined is so strong in your upbringing that your daily behavior is sort of punctuated with that belief system. And so there's really never a moment of the day when you're not engaged in religious behavior. From the food that you eat, to the hunting that you might do, from the building that you do, from any of the work that you would have to do when you're using resources in society. In an animistic religion, there's always that overtone of you are consuming, or you are sacrificing spirits, or cutting a life short. So it's an interesting kind of religious belief system to observe because it's so intertwined with daily life in ways that often monotheistic religions and polytheistic religions to a certain extent are not. Okay, so our final topic today has to do with that thing I said I started to tell you before I explained animistic religions to you. But it has to do with that empirical science question. Can we find answers in a laboratory? Can we find answers because we detect it? We detect data, or we get feedback from a seismic graph or reflection study of the Earth's crust, or astronomy because we have telescopes and so now we can capture a lot of data, or oceanography because we can go down into a submarine and collect information from parts of the ocean floor, for instance. So we have a whole lot of mechanisms in modern life in order to get empirical evidence that answers questions about mysterious things and places. In historic times, those kinds of answers to those empirical questions did not exist. So, for instance, when you look back to ancient Egypt, for instance, which was an agricultural society, or Greece, for instance, or some of the places along the Tigris and the Euphrates River in the Fertile Crescent, you will see very often components of religion that involved worshiping the sun, or worshiping the celestial bodies like the sun and the moon. And so if you think about the empirical data that we have now, most of us might find the sun and the moon and these kinds of heavenly bodies mysterious because maybe we don't know astronomy very well, but we've seen enough documentaries on the Discovery Channel to know about how the sun is the center of the universe, or of our particular system, our particular solar system. I mean, the sun is the center of that, and the planets orbit around the sun, and we know how the Earth revolves on its axis, and we know all of these different kinds of things because scientists have observed them. Other scientists have tested those observations, and we can accept those things as factual now. But in ancient times, in agricultural societies, when your entire population depended upon the kinds of foods that were going to be available and the predictability of the yield and the productivity of certain areas in your population, in the region where you lived, many times the sun was regarded as this mysterious life force, maybe even a deity, maybe even one of the gods in a polytheistic religion, or even a heliocentric religion, which might be monotheistic. The sun was something that people made sacrifices to, interacted with as though there was prayer going on. It was one of those things that we didn't really have empirical answers about. Where did it go at night? Why sometimes did clouds cover it? Why did rain come and then it blew away and you'd have full sunny days for a period of time? When your entire population relied on food, that relied on the sun, that relied on the rain cycles, that relied on floods or not, and relied on so many aspects of nature, those aspects of nature which were outside our control were usually the focus of religious questions. And so if we wanted a good crop, we could make sacrifices to the sun god, in order to please him or her so that the sun would shine favorably on our fields and produce the kinds of crops that we needed. So religion has evolved over the years as empirical science has evolved and honed in on more precise answers and become more diversified in the kinds of topics that empirical science investigates. And as that happens, and we get more and more and more empirical ideas, empirical knowledge about factual information about why mysterious things happen, that's where ethnocentrism can come into full force in modern society, because people who follow religious belief patterns and say there are ultimate answers to ultimate questions that science never can answer, scientists will say, we've answered all these questions step by step. We've answered more and more and more questions with empirical data. Step by step, we will come to an answer, empirical answers to these questions that religions still pose and propose to have answers for. So again, there's a lot of otherness in our religious behavior in modern times, because you have people who are ethnocentrically linked to their religious beliefs. I don't say that as a criticism. That's a positive side of ethnocentrism. That's what creates loyalty and faith groups. But on the other hand, you also have people who are ethnocentrically connected to their scientific data, which is a good thing, a positive side of ethnocentrism. But because you have these two different groups, the secular side and the religious side, you've got a lot of otherness in a nation like ours. You've got a lot of otherness in the world, where we will see on Thursday those regions where Hinduism is dominant and where Buddhism came in and took over some of the territory, and where Judaism was born and spread not so quickly, and where Christianity was born and why did it spread and how, and then how did the Crusades happen with Islam trying to spread into Christian areas where Christian warriors said, no, not on my watch, and started, those religious wars. So ethnocentrism is a strong thing, which we can say is a really good component, a positive component for religious life, but at the same time, it's a very negative component when we can start wars like we see in throughout all human history, based on the differences between your belief system and mine, and religion being used as a tool of power or even opposition. So this is an interesting chapter. I hope you'll find it as interesting as I do. And thank you for putting up with this alternate way of class delivery. Please stop the video, run it back, repeat things so that you can write down definitions and write down concepts from this unit. And there will be more videos for you to watch, perhaps today. If there's more videos for you to watch today, this video will be called Part 1, and you'll see other links for Part 2 and maybe even Part 3 of the videos that you need to watch for this particular class this week. Week 9, Lesson 1, possibly in more than one part. And then Week 9, Lesson 2 will be posted shortly. So watch for the announcements when these things are available, and text me if you have any questions. Bye now.